The archetypal imprint. Why we see what we expect. Not what is the clock struck midnight in 100 cities at once, but no one heard the same sound. Some heard warning, others, promise. The difference wasn't in the bells, but in what echoed beneath them. We like to believe we see the world as it is, clear, objective, real, but somewhere between perception and reality, something ancient intervenes, a pattern carved so deep into our collective consciousness that we mistake it for truth itself. This is the story of the archetypal imprint. The invisible script we inherit, the lens through which nations rise, fall, and repeat the same tragedies with different flags. And the paradox is this: the more urgent the moment, the tighter the loop becomes. There's a principle in psychology that rarely makes it into history books. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols, fears, and responses passed down through generations. Not through language or logic, but through something older: instinct, pattern, memory without a witness. Every culture carries its own archetypal imprint, a psychological fingerprint that shapes how it interprets crisis, power, and survival. It's why two nations can face the same threat and respond in opposite ways. It's not strategy. It's inheritance. Consider this. When Rome faced collapse, it doubled down on expansion. When the Soviet Union sensed its end, it tightened control. When empires crumble, they don't adapt, they amplify. They return to the original pattern, the first response, the imprint that once saved them. But what if that imprint is no longer relevant? What if the solution encoded in our collective memory no longer matches the problem we face? Here's where it gets strange. Under pressure, we don't think more clearly, we think more archetypally. The cortex quiets. The limbic system takes over. And suddenly, we're not reacting to what's in front of us. We're reacting to what our ancestors survived. This is why wars repeat. Why economic collapses follow predictable patterns. Why revolutions betray their ideals almost immediately. The actors change, the stage rotates, but the script stays the same. Jung once noted that nations have shadows too. The traits they exile become their obsessions. America projects freedom while fearing chaos. Russia projects strength while fearing betrayal. China projects unity while fearing fragmentation. And the irony: the more a nation denies its shadow, the more it becomes that shadow. Pause for a moment. Imagine history not as a timeline, but as a spiral. The same conflicts, the same fears, the same desperate grasps for control, circling upward through time, gaining complexity but never truly evolving. Now imagine that spiral tightening, faster, closer, until the loop becomes so small that there's no space left between repetition and present moment. That's what urgency does. It collapses time, it removes reflection. It activates the imprint. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world came within hours of nuclear war, not because of strategy, not because of miscommunication, but because both sides were operating from archetypal fears so deep they couldn't see past them. The United States saw Munich, 1938, appeasement, weakness, the cost of not acting. The Soviet Union saw Barbarossa, 1941, encirclement, invasion, the cost of not preparing. Neither side was responding to Cuba. They were responding to ghosts. And here's the unsettling part. Both were right. The patterns they feared were real. The imprints were earned through trauma. But the match between past and present, that was an illusion. This is the trap. The archetypal imprint isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. It worked once. It saved us once. And so we keep reaching for it, even when the context has changed entirely. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about your own reactions under stress. When something goes wrong, a conflict, a loss, a sudden shift, what's your first move? Do you withdraw, attack, freeze, negotiate, control? Whatever it is, you've probably done it before. Many times, it's your imprint, your inherited strategy. And if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. You often make that move before you even know what the problem is. We do this individually. Families do this generationally. And nations do this historically. The pattern doesn't lie in the content of the crisis. It lies in the response. And the response is rarely about now. It's about then, about the wound that taught us what to fear, and the solution that once made us feel safe. But here's the deepest layer, the one we almost never see. The imprint doesn't just shape how we respond. It shapes what we perceive. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. But it goes further than that. It's perceptual filtering at a collective level. We don't just interpret the world through our imprint, we literally see a different world because of it. Show a Russian, an American, and a Chinese diplomat the same geopolitical event. They will describe three different realities. Not because one is lying, but because the archetypal lens is so powerful it preselects what information counts as real. The American sees freedom under threat. The Russian sees security compromised. The Chinese sees harmony disrupted. Same event. Three separate worlds, and the most dangerous part, each believes they're seeing objectively. This is where urgency becomes the accelerant. When time compresses, when stakes rise, when the pressure mounts, our brains don't expand their perspective, they narrow it. Tunnel vision sets in. and the only thing visible inside that tunnel is the imprint. The loop intensifies. The past becomes the present. And suddenly, we're not navigating reality, we're reenacting memory. Was it strategy or collective compulsion? Was it leadership or the script playing out one more time, with different actors reading the same lines? Take the War on Terror. After September 11th, America activated an imprint. The frontier, the enemy at the gates, the existential battle between civilization and chaos. It was real. The trauma was real. But the response that came from somewhere older, manifest destiny. The Cold War, World War II. The same archetypal pattern, reactivated. And just like before, the more America fought for security, the more insecure it became. The imprint demanded expansion, so expansion followed regardless of whether it solved the actual problem. This isn't criticism, it's observation. Because every nation does this. Every generation does this. The imprint isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It's how collective psychology stabilizes itself under pressure. But stabilization isn't the same as clarity. And that's where perception misaligns with reality. Let me give you a personal example of how this works. What surprised me most wasn't what I learned about archetypal psychology, but how journaling helped me observe my own patterns more clearly. I wasn't expecting such clarity, and it reminded me that seeing the world differently always starts with seeing ourselves differently. Writing slowed me down enough to notice the script I'd been running unconsciously for years. This isn't a recommendation, just something that changed how I process information. I'll leave a link below if you want to explore what I mean. So why does perception misalign with reality? Because reality is fluid, contextual, endlessly complex. But the imprint is fixed. It's a map drawn long ago, when the territory looked different. And under urgency, we stop checking whether the map still matches the land. We just follow it, faster, harder, more desperately. History repeats, not because we forget, but because we remember selectively. We remember what saved us. We forget what no longer applies. And the more urgent the moment, the less we question the memory. This is the paradox at the heart of geopolitics, psychology, and human behavior. The thing that once made us strong eventually makes us brittle. The imprint that ensured survival becomes the cage that prevents adaptation. Nations cling to their founding myths even as the world changes beyond recognition. They project their shadows onto enemies who are often just mirrors. They repeat the same strategies, expecting different outcomes, because the alternative, questioning the imprint itself, feels like erasing identity. But what if identity isn't fixed? What if the patterns we inherited are just one way of being, not the only way? What if we could see the loop without being trapped inside it? There's a concept in systems theory called a strange loop, a self-referential cycle, where the output becomes the input, feeding itself indefinitely. It's how we get stuck, and it's exactly what happens when the archetypal imprint meets urgency. Fear triggers the imprint. The imprint generates a response. The response creates more fear, and the loop tightens. This is why peace treaties fail, why reforms collapse, why revolutions consume themselves. It's not because people want chaos, it's because the imprint demands repetition, even when repetition leads to ruin. The pattern isn't malicious, it's mechanical, and that's what makes it so hard to escape. For a moment, imagine the world without the imprints, without the inherited scripts, without the archetypal filters that predecide what we see and how we respond. Imagine nations not as monolithic actors, but as collections of people, each carrying their own loops, their own fears, their own desperate attempts to feel safe in an uncertain world. What changes? Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but at the very least, the question itself creates a gap, a pause, a moment where the loop isn't inevitable. So here's what we're left with. The archetypal imprint is real. It shapes perception. It drives behavior. It intensifies under urgency. And it misaligns with reality precisely because reality refuses to stay still. But awareness changes the game. Not because it erases the imprint. It doesn't. The patterns run too deep for that. But because awareness introduces choice. It creates space between stimulus and response, between inherited memory and present moment. And in that space, something different becomes possible. The content is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical, financial, or professional advice, and should not be used as a substitute for guidance from qualified professionals. All decisions made based on this content are the sole responsibility of the individual. Somewhere between the wars, we stopped seeing enemies and started seeing mirrors. Not because conflict disappeared, but because the imprint became visible. The script became legible. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The flags still wave, but now we see them differently. They were never about nations, only about the mind's need for meaning, for identity, for a story that makes survival feel like destiny. And maybe that's enough. Not to escape the loop, but to recognize it, to honor where it came from, to see it as a response, not the truth, because the truth is always more complex than the imprint allows. In the moment we remember that, the loop loosens, just a little, just enough. What part of this story made you rethink how you see your own patterns and how those patterns see you? If this made you think differently, you've already joined the shadow. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video.